Kuljian to visit us. We finally succeeded. Thank you very much for coming to talk. So many of you will have read her book, and those who haven't, you can purchase the book. It's an exceptional book. It was shortlisted for the Alan Paton Nonfiction Award. It's definitely well worth reading. And we're going to have you see the title there. So it fits in really well with the project that preceded Indexing Transformation, which was called Indexing the Human. And tomorrow we'll have a talk by Dr. Henry Walters on a related topic. And Henry really was a catalyst for this Indexing the Human project. And her PhD goes into it, and the two of you had a very good, productive discussion about ideas of turning the PhD into books. I'm putting you on the spot. We're waiting for the book.
No pressure.
But thank you all for coming, and let's have a presentation, 40 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have more than enough time for discussion. Thanks,
right.
Christa.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I too am excited to be here today, and been looking forward to it. And so I appreciate the invitation. I studied the history of science when I was at university. And I studied with Stephen Jay Gould, who was a paleontologist and historian of science. And he really focused on the fact that science is not always neutral or objective, but that scientists are often shaped by their social and political context, by the events of their times, by the assumptions of their time. And so Darwin's Hunch looks at the history of science, the history of paleontology and genetics, with some of those questions in mind. How did colonialism shape scientists in the early 20th century? How did apartheid shape some of the thinking of scientists here in South Africa? So Darwin's Hunch, the title, comes from the fact that Darwin, one of his many theories, was that humans had evolved in Africa. And when he wrote about that in 1871, most of his peers disagreed with that idea. They were looking elsewhere. They were looking for human origins in Asia and in Europe. So Darwin's idea, or his hunch, actually over the last 150 years has been proven correct. We'll look at 3 different time frames this afternoon to kind of review that history of the search for human origins, specifically in South Africa. And we're going to look at a time frame which is the late 1800s through to the 1940s, where Raymond Dart played a prominent role, and scientists were very shaped by colonial thinking. We'll look at a second time frame, which is the 1950s to the 1980s, which had a particular context under apartheid in South Africa. Phillip Tobias also was a very prominent scientist in this field at that time. And then we'll look at a more current time frame, which is the late 1980s through to, say, about 2015. And what has shaped the change in the social context, but also in the scientific thinking, and some of the new ideas about genetics and the new findings about human origins. So I like to start with a story that some of you may be familiar with to kind of illustrate this point of how science can be shaped by the assumptions of the time. It's a story of Piltdown Man. Now, Piltdown Man was a set of fossils that were found in Sussex, England in 1912.